Architecture should tell a story about the people, the culture, climate, and the context. Most of the architectural work we see in Bangladesh today, unfortunately, does not reflect a consideration of these very important aspects. Mostly, barring a few exceptions, few architects who are doing very sensitive work that are relevant to the context to this country, but most of the works you see are simple copies from different magazines, and that is not, which is something very desirable. In the mid-60s, when we were deciding on studying architecture, architecture in this country was a little known profession. Very few people heard the word. As a matter of fact, architecture was often pronounced as architecture. When I first heard that there's a department known as architecture department, and a friend of mine was studying architecture, so I became very interested. I used to go to different libraries. For instance, I used to go to the American Cultural Center, look at magazines and find works of different architects, and from there a little interest grew in me that perhaps instead of going into engineering or physics or something else, physics, I was very interested in physics, but architecture caught my eye. Finally, I decided that maybe I should try my luck, maybe appear for the admission test in BUET. I did so. As a matter of fact, I appeared for admissions in engineering as well as in architecture in BUET, and I was selected for both. And I decided to study architecture. But my father, he didn't know what architecture was. At that time, architecture was something similar or synonymous, considered synonymous with civil engineering. And I was very interested in joining economics too. As a matter of fact, I was selected for economics. But the chairman of the economics department in Chittagong College, where I intended to do economics, he was a friend of my father, and he managed to convince me that architecture is a far better field than economics. And finally, I decided on studying architecture. And having started architecture, I began to like it, I began to love it, and here I am, an architect teaching. I've spent almost my whole life in teaching, even at times when I was not directly involved as a full-time teacher. I used to do part-time in different universities, not because of the money, but because I always loved teaching. As a matter of fact, I don't have any particular person as a mentor. I have a couple of persons, I think, who have influenced my life as an architect and the way I teach. One of them was, at the very beginning, Professor Richard A. Vrooman, who was the founder of the Department of Architecture. And later, during my studentship, when I was a student, I think Mr. Samshul Waris, I used to love the way he used to teach. I used to love the way he engaged the students. And I used to love the way he managed to encourage them to go deep into the meaning of architecture. As a professional architect, I think I always liked the work of the doyen of architects in this country, Mr. Mazharul Islam. But I was also very scared because I've heard that he was a man of very short temper and easily lost his temper with other people. So I seldom went to him, but I always admired his work. and I admire the work he has done throughout this country. I grew up in Chittagong. My primary education up to pre-university was in Chittagong. I came to Dhaka to do my bachelor's degree in architecture, and that was in Buet. After completing my bachelor's degree, I worked for a while as a teacher in the architecture department Buet. Then I went for my higher studies to the US. I did my master's in architecture from the University of Hawaii. As I said earlier, I had joined the department just after graduating, way back in the early 70s. And I had worked part-time in a couple of firms, but in terms of designing independent project, that only happened later when I came back from the United States after doing my master's. I worked for a couple of years with some friends of ours. There I designed a couple of facilities, and I still remember my first project as an independent architect working for that firm was a training center, and I took a lot of pains in designing this training center, and it came out quite well, and I was very satisfied with it. And others who were looking at the design were also very satisfied with it. But the problem arose when dealing with the client. Finally, we had to abandon that project, and the clients went ahead without the supervision, and they constructed that project. I had the opportunity of visiting that project a couple of times after it was constructed. It came out quite well, despite the fact that we were not involved in the supervision, and there were certain changes made by the client which we did not like. But unfortunately, that no longer exists. I went back a couple of years back. It was torn down, and in that place, there's a 10-story building today. Other than that, I also worked. I was very deeply involved in a commercial building, which also won an IB award for design excellence. The Shanakullan Shonsta in Motijil, in which I was involved with a friend of mine. I was deeply involved in drawing up all the details of the building. Other than that, early in life I designed a couple of residences for my friends and relations. Some of them came out very well, but unfortunately recently a couple of months back, I wanted to see the condition of those buildings after so many years. Unfortunately, I couldn't find them. The one in Baradara was torn down. It was a vacant spot awaiting the developers coming up with a high-rise building. And the other was in Banani, which was also torn down. Then came this was in late 70s or early 80s. Then came the 90s, when I designed a couple of buildings for my relations. And one building in particular that I designed in Danpandi, there were a lot of problems on the details, but overall the building came out very well. And my own house in Uttara, it's not a house as a matter of fact, it's an apartment building, which we brothers and sisters, combinedly developed. This house is a very simple house. The spaces are organized in such a way that one space flows into the other. And I've divided the ground floor into four quadrants, you may say. And one is the living room and the kitchen, and the other quadrant is a little garden and the dining room, one flowing into the other. There are a few details in this house that are deliberately done to protect the house from heat, that is the solar radiation, and also to prevent seepage of water during the rainy seasons, because this is an exposed brick building. Exposed brick building, a common problem is sometimes there's water seepage. So what I've done is the exterior walls in this building are cavity walls with a small cavity of 2-inch cavity, and basically there are two 5-inch walls, and the exterior walls, there are ventilation holes in the exterior walls. The whole wall surface is divided into panel, and each panel has 3 ventilation holes. What happens is this prevents first solar heat from entering the house, because the internal 5-inch wall can never get heated, because the heat comes to that cavity, and the air in the cavity, there's always a circulation of that air due to convection current, and that keeps the house cool. This gap also helps in preventing penetration of moisture to the inner wall, because whatever moisture that penetrates the outer wall dries up through this convection current that takes place in the cavity. And because of that ventilation holes, the vapor pressure in the cavity cannot build up and force the moisture into the inner layer. So this little feature keeps this house dry in the monsoon season, and also prevents solar radiation from coming inside, to the extent that I've heard some of my friends on entering this house on a hot summer day ask me whether I have air conditioners or not. But it was simply the circulation of air, and also these little innovative features that was keeping the house cool. I'll talk of another building that I designed for my sister. Originally it was a 3-story one-unit building, and the plot was quite small plot in Dhanmandi. It was only 4 and 4.25 kathas, and it was a long elongated plot. It was a rectangular plot. It's 35 feet by about 96 feet, if I'm not mistaken. It was almost like a lane. It's situated in a quite dense urban area, and as a matter of fact, there's nothing to look out in that area. So I took a deliberate decision to look in. So the whole house is centered around a central courtyard, and it's basically the living quarters on the first floor and above, and the living room, drawing room, the dining room, kitchen, the guest room are on the ground floor where the courtyard is. And that too, the plot is elongated north-south. So the southern exposure is a smaller exposure. I have 2 screens on 2 sides, which lets the air come in but keeps out the sun. And the central courtyard, due to the stack effect, stays cool throughout the day, and also in summer times. And the central courtyard is so popular with visitors that except for people who are really strangers to that house, people who are familiar with that house, do not care to enter the living room. They just find their way to the central courtyard and use the courtyard, which stays shaded and cool throughout the day. That house is also totally exposed brick, both inside and outside, and it has no plaster work, as a matter of fact. And there are a lot of innovative features there. On the ceiling, I've used hollow ceiling stones to provide insulation from solar radiation from the top. And it has been so successful that people think there is another story on top. It keeps the house real cool. And there also I've used double walls, but but the cavity is not void. I filled it up with concrete. And at that time I was thinking only of moisture penetration, and I was not thinking of keeping the interior of the house cool, which I should have thought. So that, I believe, it's to my mind, it's quite a successful house, and whoever sees that house likes it and appreciates the design.
So his contribution to NSU architecture is like kind of a very father figure who has been from the start, and he has helped in the formation of the school in the last few years. His approach to teaching and his role in shaping up the methods of teaching in NSU is more like we have always tried to keep Haroon sir in the senior classes, like in the thesis batches, because we felt that when a student graduates, just before he enters into the profession, he needs to have this orientation that from here, where will the students go next, because they are at the crossroads. They are graduating, their student lives kind of is coming to an end, the last 5 years student life, and they would go into the profession. So Haroon sir would not only be the studio teacher, but he would also be kind of a guide.
My vision is of an architecture that truly reflects this country, is truly relevant to the context of this country. We can look into our backyards, even in terms of energy efficient design, for instance. We can look into the backyard and see how they used to deal with things, rather than trying to import new gadgets to try to control our weather, and helping the multinational who manufacture those gadgets. We should not be falling prey to the products of the multinational who has a big stake. And in the name of globalization, that is what is happening. When I'm concerned, I don't believe much in globalization. Well, I believe in being aware of what's going on throughout the world, but I also believe that we should sincerely make an effort to develop something that we can truly call our own, and that is, in short, my vision. Sometimes we architects take on responsibility which are beyond our scope, and I think we should be a bit less exuberant in assuming responsibilities. I think architect's first responsibility is to his profession, and second, to the client, and I think finally to the society. Because a good piece of architecture affects the society. If we have a lot of good architects and good architectural work, ultimately it improves the environment. Charles Correa once said that we don't see too many good architectural buildings in Calcutta. And he was saying perhaps one of the reasons is we don't have good works of architecture in Calcutta. And I think the work of Louis Khan in the Capitol building in Dhaka, or the Capitol complex in Dhaka, has influenced good architecture in this country. Likewise, works of Mr. Islam has been an inspiration to all of us, and I think it will continue to be an inspiration to all of us who value architecture dearly.